GM, welcome back to the Rollup, and today is an episode with Jill from Espresso. In this episode, we are talking about why all the shared sequencers have disappeared. No one wants to be a shared sequencer anymore. We're going to talk about why. We're also going to talk about the current fragmented world of Ethereum and how ultimately connecting these rollup clusters is a very important problem to solve. All of that and more on today's episode. Stay tuned. First, a word from our sponsors. Enjoy.
Covalent is solving the long-term data availability problem where a lot of the data availability providers today in the modular space, when you post data to them, they actually only hold that data for about 12 to 16 days. And then it's basically, they can go into an archive node, or oftentimes it's just kind of put away into the abyss. And what Covalent's trying to do is build this long-term data availability solution, which can plug into some of these modular data availability providers and provide this longer-term perpetual data solution. So what we try to think of this as is when you post transaction data onto Celestia or Veil or any of these modular DA solutions or even Ethereum, Covalent is able to provide a long-term data storage and data availability platform for that data after the time period. Blockchains are billboards, not databases, and we need these providers in the space to be able to kind of hold on to the long-term data that is provided from these providers and these blockchain state. This is where Covalent comes in. They just had a nice rebrand. Check them out on Twitter as well as the website. Thank you for being here. Hope you enjoy the rest of the show.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Rollup. Today, we are going to answer the question for once and for all is, are we all building the same thing? Well, not exactly, but we're going to talk about the walled gardens of Ethereum scaling. Jill's going to make Ethereum composable again in 42 minutes. And Rob's got a lot of questions. So looking forward to this. Rob, you survived the hurricane. Good to see you on the other side.
GM, they're the hurricane online. They're the hurricane in real life. Just dodging left and right, staying dry. Yeah, I do. I have a bunch of questions. I think we're probably going to answer a bunch of those, but then maybe end up with even more. That's usually how these things tend to go. And so, yeah, without further ado, Jill, welcome to the Rollup.
Great to be here. I'm just trying to survive the hurricane in the markets myself right now.
Yeah, aren't we all?
But this isn't your first rodeo, is it, Joe? I mean, this isn't the first hurricane that you've seen.
I was thinking about that this morning. I first bought Bitcoin in 2013. I'm like, oh my God, how many rodeos do I have to go through? How many cycles do I have to survive? You do become numb to it after a while, but not completely. It's still, you still wake up with your heart in your chest a little bit, heart in your throat.
Remind yourself why you're still here and just keep building.
Exactly.
But it is your first time on the Rollup. Do you want to kind of tell your origin story and introduce yourself a little bit?
For sure. Yeah. It is indeed my first rodeo on the Rollup. So I'm Jill. I am head of strategy and a co-founder at Espresso Systems. We are working on Ethereum infrastructure, perhaps someday more broadly across L1s to enable better interoperability, better decentralization, specifically of rollups, and doing all of that without sacrificing the scale that we've gotten to. Before this, I worked for a while in venture capital with a fund called Slow Ventures, running their crypto portfolio. And before that, I did a whole bunch of different things. I've worked with a number of different L1s in the space. I worked for a while on enterprise blockchain solutions back in 2016 kind of era. So lived a lot of different lives in this weird, wild, wonderful ecosystem that we're in. Prior to all of this, I also worked in TradFi. So I started out my career as a bond trader and then eventually ended up spending way more time trading Bitcoin than I was trading bonds that I was supposed to be paying attention to. And that was my cue to pivot.
What were you doing in 2013 that led you to buy Bitcoin?
So I was working on the Latin American trading desk at Goldman in New York. So I was trading Venezuelan debt, Argentine debt and derivatives, all of these economies that still to this day, and certainly at the time, were going through all kinds of turmoil, capital controls in place to try and stabilize things in many of these cases. And it was a conversation that I had with a broker who was on the ground in Argentina, who was trying to get his money offshore to evade the capital controls that they had in place, more or less. And I just remember talking to this guy being like, man, you work in like high finance. Surely there's a better way other than this kind of sketchy Bitcoin thing for you to get your money diversified out of the Argentine peso. Argentina at the time was also going through a debt crisis, debt restructuring, default, and things were just kind of wild economically there. And he was very insistent to me that no, Bitcoin was the way and Bitcoin was the future. And so that caught my interest, and I was like, okay, there's some utility here. There must be something to this thing. And down the rabbit hole I went, never looked back.
Coming full circle, there's a pop-up city from Edge City next month in Buenos Aires.
Yes, I was looking into that. I was tempted to go myself. I've spent a little bit of time, not nearly enough, in the Latin American kind of crypto and Bitcoin scene. I actually did academic research for my master's degree back in 2015 on the ground in Buenos Aires, talking to all of the people there who were using Bitcoin at the time. Met a lot of the kind of early Bitcoin and crypto entrepreneurs, Diego from Rootstock, Sebastian from Ripio. Like, all of these people were sort of my first foray into the space. They were all really helpful to me at the time, just in terms of understanding what this space was about, what was going on. And really still to this day, I would say a lot of the products and use cases and just people on the ground using Bitcoin who I got exposed to in that period, I think still really inform the way that I think about it. I think that the way that you get into crypto, it does kind of determine how you'll go on. And for me in particular, seeing those use cases of, again, people really kind of using Bitcoin as a lifeline to escape from the bad government policies that were in place that were hurting them. It really made me value the fact that, okay, this is about decentralization, censorship resistance, and these are really important qualities that we're not just speaking lip service to, or we're not just playing into some libertarian ideal like fantasy land. It really is a core part of the value proposition. So yeah, I guess that's gone on to inform what I'm doing now with Espresso. Like, obviously decentralization is a big component of what we're working towards, and also just open systems. I know we're going to talk today a lot about interoperability and open systems and all of that. And, so much of TradFi, whether, it's more extreme if you're in a place like Argentina, capital controls in place. But even my experience of TradFi as someone privileged enough to live in the United States and have a US bank account, it's just managing assets across all of these different siloed systems. It's so painful. And yeah, I really do think a lot of crypto is about an open landscape in a way that we don't have, and again, in a way that certainly if you're in an economy with capital controls, you definitely don't have access to. So that is my rant. That is my mission. That is
Great
how
rant.
I ended up here on the roll up with you guys today.
Yeah, that's the Argentines are still reliant on Bitcoin to this day. And when you walk down, there's actually a street in Buenos Aires called Florida Street.
Yes.
Where, if you go down there's a lot of people asking for money transfers, and they'll accept Bitcoin, sometimes Ripple, and sometimes Ethereum for to do a transfer if they have cash, because you have to do everything in cash there. So there are use cases.
Yeah, I have many memories of interviewing people on Florida Street for this research that I was doing. Absolutely, it's wild.
That's awesome. Well, you mentioned open systems, and I think that was really the premise that got us interested in this conversation today. I think to set the stage, like, we're seeing Ethereum scale off the base layer into this rollup-centric roadmap, which has led to tons of different chains launching. And now this kind of concept of these rollup clusters happening. You've got the Superchain. Optimism has just came out and has really changed their entire position in the market, or is at least trying to, from being like, we are the L2, Optimism, this one chain, to no, we are this super chain. You got Arbitrum Orbit, and Caldera has pushed this meta layer idea. Even like newer innovations like Anisha outside of the Ethereum ecosystem. Everyone's trying to build these systems which are somehow siloed again, but are very interoperable inside of this system, but perhaps not so interoperable outside. Or there's kind of different use cases for being in and out. And you kind of have put this thread together recently about building walled gardens, and I think that you set the stage pretty well as to your beliefs. So yeah, maybe we could just have an open conversation about the state of scaling Ethereum as far as these rollup clusters go, and kind of how you're seeing this develop from your perspective.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a desire or tendency, certainly on my part, to be kind of binary about things of, okay, it's either an open system or a closed system. But in reality, all of this is almost fractal in the way that it's playing out, right? Where, you have sort of the greater financial system as a whole. And then within that, you have blockchains. And there's a certain level of interoperability that you get within blockchains. And then within blockchains, you have, Bitcoin and Ethereum and Solana and Cosmos and all of these ecosystems that have a certain degree of composability, interoperability within and among them. And then also certain frictions and certain risks that you have to take to move across them. And the same goes to move from any of these systems back to TradFi. It used to be the case that within Ethereum, that was all one pretty seamlessly composable ecosystem, composable unit. When I use the word composability, I'm referring to this kind of money Legos idea, right? Of being able to have different applications, different smart contracts, be able to interact and call each other seamlessly, without having to rely on bridges, without having to rely on, large delays or things like this. So it used to be the case that Ethereum was one composable ecosystem with, again, very seamless interoperability across applications. You could use any different wallet interface, of course, to access what was going on. Now, of course, as we've moved towards the rollup-centric roadmap, which has been great for Ethereum, it's really, people often talk about it as kind of the broadband moment for Ethereum. And I think that that's very true. I think that it's been necessary for us to move this direction in order to achieve the types of scale, the types of low cost, just the type of overall user experience that users expect from their digital tools these days. But that has created, again, this fragmentation. So moving one more level down on this kind of fractal mind map of the overall financial system, blockchains, Ethereum. Now you're exactly right. We have the Optimism ecosystem, the Polygon CDK ecosystem, the ZK Sync Elastic Chain ecosystem. I could go on and on. Starkware and Starknet and the Stark chains. All of these things. It's been difficult as a user to be able to then get used to going from that one a seamless experience of Ethereum to get used to having to move between and among. I don't even want to show you what my MetaMask wallet looks like now with the drop down of like all of these different silos now where I have my assets.
We got to get you on Rabby.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
You gotta get off the MetaMask.
It's time. I've just outed myself as a crypto boomer.
You have.
I'm still on MetaMask. But it's been an adjustment for sure. And so a big part of what I think a big part of what the ecosystem as a whole is thinking about is just how do we move back to a more open system within Ethereum, at least? And then beyond that, perhaps, crossing into different L1s and being able to create a more seamless overall blockchain ecosystem experience, and have that be truly an open infinite garden, once again, without sacrificing the gains that we've made in terms of scalability and maintaining, of course, decentralization. So yeah, I think that's kind of the state of things. At least that's the state of how I've experienced it myself as a user.
Yeah, I am really glad that you brought up the DeFi money Legos as the illustration for composability, because I vividly remember that as a very vibrant sort of like value addition and like value add use case for blockchains beyond traditional finance. It was like we can all kind of manage rehypothecation and borrows and lend. Everything could be a little bit more efficient if it's composable. And then we've just kind of like lost sight of things as we've gone into like these different silos. We've become so much less composable. And I think that sort of sets the stage as far as like, if we kind of see like, I think that was a great overview of like the state of things. And now if we look at like, where do we go from here? It's like, well, first, I think it's helpful to kind of like illustrate the destination and then figure out like how to get there. And so when everything was an app on Ethereum, I think we just kind of called that composability, and we were able to stack these different DeFi money Legos on top of one another. But when we're talking about composability across these different roll-up clusters and these different siloed environments, then we have to call it atomic composability.
Yeah, this is why I say it's not binary, is that we have all of these different versions of what interoperability can be and can feel like. And I mean, I'm guilty of this. We all tend to talk just about, we're solving, roll-up interoperability, and kind of leave it at that. Or we go down these sort of hyper technical rabbit holes into the weeds of what specifically, is meant by synchronous atomic composability, which I think is very valuable to get specific on and to have specific definitions on. But for me, kind of taking a step back, I think it's also important to look at the why of any of this. Like, okay, exactly what you're saying. What are the sort of use cases or user experiences and things like this that we're solving for? So, I mean, I'm happy to speak to that with regards to Espresso. I'm happy to speak to that of just sort of my opinions as a user and person in this space.
I mean, I'm generally curious about like without getting super deep into the engineering details, like more so of the incentive structures. Like,
yeah,
ultimately, I think composability leads to a more efficient financial system, even if that system is a subset of the greater. And I love the fractal mental model too. I think even just a little subset of that being more efficient is beneficial for the greater whole. And so I'm curious, like how you see like the incentive structures for composability and arriving to composability as kind of like the destination for these roll-up clusters.
Yeah. So I think if I think about it as if I am, the folks over at Arbitrum or the folks at Optimism or the folks at ZK Sync or Starkware or Polygon, any of these places, and I am looking at this ecosystem that I'm creating based on the technology stack that I've developed, I would arrive at the same place that all of them have. I think it's just a realistic fact of the world that you're going to look at the community and the ecosystem that you're building and say, oh, wow, we've got a lot of traction here. We're building the best technology. It's the right and natural thing for us to build and incubate and develop and nurture this garden. I don't think that any of them are thinking of it as, okay, we're going to build our own little walled garden over here and that's going to take over the world. You're just looking at what's in front of you in terms of again, the thriving ecosystem that you have and saying, okay, yeah, this is happening. This is what I need to nurture and develop. It's not that dissimilar to the way that Ethereum came about. Again, outing myself as a boomer, I remember when Ethereum was initially proposed as an idea, and of course all of the Bitcoiners were like, this is crap, like this isn't going to go anywhere. Why are they building this over here? At the time in Bitcoin world, there were all different ideas about how to bring more programmability to Bitcoin, these like crazy colored coin ideas, things like this. And at the time, again, it felt like Ethereum was building its own sort of siloed ecosystem. But, as it turned out, Ethereum became this sort of infinite garden that gave us composability in the first place. And so I think that is probably reflective of the mindset of all of these different L2s as they are going about nurturing their ecosystems, which is the right thing to do. Now, how do we get those ecosystems to interoperate? I think first and foremost, you need there to be some kind of pressure from users, from developers for those ecosystems to interoperate again. And for that, you need a competitor to come in and create basically what Ethereum had been offering those developers and users in terms of composability. And for that competitor to demonstrate, hey, look, if you guys don't figure out a way to offer this to users, we're just going to take your users, or we're just going to take your developers, perhaps in this case. I think Solana today is broadly playing that role for Ethereum. And I think that that's a very good, very healthy dynamic. Like what Solana is doing is, in terms of their market positioning, in terms of their traction, in terms of mind share and developer share and all of that, I think is great for them. I'm a Solana believer. I'm a Solana holder, full disclosure. But I also think that it's actually great for Ethereum, because I think you need someone to be playing that role to create this pressure to make Ethereum composable again. Otherwise, the various roll-up ecosystems will just continue to build upon themselves and not worry about offering that to users. But I mean, you talk to developers today, app developers, and they're really considering three different options, right? One option is to deploy on a rollup on Ethereum. And then they start considering, okay, but which rollup do I deploy on? Like there's all of these different community and kind of like vibes based elements of what to choose. There's of course incentives, grants, monetary incentives around what to choose. And then there's just looking at where are the users, where is the liquidity. But that's like a lot of mental overhead if you're an app developer and you're just trying to get an application out in the world and start testing, start getting feedback and all of that. The second thing that they're thinking about is, well, I've heard of these app-specific rollups. Should I become an app-specific rollup? Should I work with a partner like Caldera or Altlayer or one of these to help me just deploy the application as its own rollup? There are some benefits to that, certainly. I don't need to tell the modular kings here. It's the modularity benefits of being able to pick and choose what parts of the stack you want, being able to have that sort of sovereignty over your own future. There's also benefits in terms of business model of being able to say, oh, if I'm my own rollup, if I'm my own chain, I get to keep the sequencer fees associated with the users of the product. That's a huge part of it. But again, that's a lot of overhead and a lot to be considering, especially for kind of the earlier developers, earlier in the life cycle of the product that they're building and bringing to market. And then the third thing they're considering is, well, there's Solana over here that like works pretty well. Like I've heard some things about downtime, but it seems to be broadly okay. And, there's no fragmented liquidity issues. There's like much less complexity in terms of the considerations I have to make around where to deploy. Maybe I'll just go do that. And developers today are doing all three of these things. But again, I think the fact that Solana is an option as just like this one contiguous, composable ecosystem where you're not worried about any of these other dynamics, it does put that competitive pressure on the Ethereum rollup community to say, okay, well, what's our answer to that? How do we make sure that we're not losing a big proportion of our potential developer ecosystem over to that competitive set? So that's how I think about some of the incentives as they go on today.
I think it's super relevant to this tweet, especially this last line of like, I'm seeing lots of energy and will to make this happen. Vitalik referring to how quickly cross L2 interoperability problems will stop being problems and we get a smooth user experience. And, I think the pressure from Solana is there. And I also think just like the community is just kind of getting generally tired of it. But I think
Totally.
when Vitalik put this like, okay, Ethereum is going to do this rollup-centric roadmap, he kind of thought it was going to just be perhaps like it's all going to be under Ethereum's brand and like it's going to feel like Ethereum perhaps, or there was some idea here that these were all just extensions of Ethereum. I think the original idea was proposed via like sharding, but like we haven't seen that. We've seen like all these brands like kind of go and make their big names for themselves, launch their own tokens. And there's even been talk about how like Ethereum is cucked as an asset because you can buy all these different L2 tokens rather than just buying ETH and Sol. You just buy Sol, so there's a lot of pressure from the community. But I'm curious about how you're thinking about these rollups as like extensions of Ethereum from like a branding and from like a market perspective. And in general, if you agree with Vitalik or not.
Mantle is a layer 2 blockchain with one of the biggest on-chain treasuries in all of crypto, and they had a 100-day campaign called Metamorphosis live now. What this is it is a campaign for their liquid staked ETH token, METH, as well as their upcoming liquid restaking token, CMETH, where you can utilize this token on the Mantle network in a variety of different apps, some of your favorite restaking protocols and DeFi protocols, and earn yields in the form of powder, which will eventually be turning into a governance token. Mantle's been around for a while. We like them because they use their own form of EigenDA. They have a good ecosystem and they're growing. So check out this 100-day Metamorphosis campaign and hope you guys enjoy the rest of this video. Everclear is pioneering the clearing layer. The clearing layer can almost be thought of as splitwise when you go on a trip with friends, but for the blockchain. What I mean by that is when users are sending cross-chain messages, there's oftentimes fillers and solvers who have balances left on different chains that they need to rebalance and reset their positions. This is where Everclear comes in. Everclear is pioneering a collaborative approach to the chain abstraction future, and they are willing to work with interoperability partners, solvers, and other providers in the space to build a interoperable and chain abstraction future. Check out Everclear at everclear.org, and welcome back to the Rollup.
So, I do agree with Vitalik. There's a ton of energy around all of this. I think that what we as an ecosystem need to get better at is really articulating what parts of this problem space each of us is solving. And I think you guys talk about this a lot on this show and just in your writing and all of this, that we're using all of the same terms to mean different things, or in some cases inventing new terms when there's already a perfectly good one out there for us to use. And again, it gets at the complexity of this as an issue, just the fact that there is a spectrum of what we mean by interoperability, and so then what we mean by a solution for it. And I think that, I would be curious. My follow-up question to Vitalik would be, okay, like by what definition, like what is the problem that, you're actually talking about in terms of seeing that be solved on a short-term time horizon? That's the question that I get all the time as someone who is helping to run one of the companies who's working on this space, is to just get increasingly specific, I think, about what we mean and what actually gets unlocked for users. But broadly, having just been at ETHCC in Brussels, like it felt like every project I was talking to, partly I'm sure due to, the crowds and the circles I was hanging out in, but it felt like every project I was talking to is working on some component of this. I think that the biggest thing is that we all just need to be talking to each other, and really coordinating as an ecosystem, as one ecosystem around Ethereum to solve the problem together and not end up with not only, 16 different rollup clusters, but also hundreds of different solutions or protocols or standards for, solving other aspects of the space. So that's kind of my feeling around it. It's something that we're trying to do at Espresso, our collaboration with Polygon and the ag layer, and just the work that we're doing across various different roll-up communities and roll-up stacks and working with different grass players and all of that. Like, we're really trying to take an inclusive approach because I think, just practically speaking, that's what's needed. But that said, it's a challenge for sure. And it does come back to incentives. Everyone wants to see their product succeed. Everyone wants to see their product become the standard. And everyone also, I think that this is a beautiful thing about people in crypto, and also sometimes our own downfall. We end up with these very expansive roadmaps where maybe we can do everything someday. But in reality, I think that Ethereum as an ecosystem is better served when we're all, again, kind of coordinating and working together. And I think that competition can be a healthy part of that also, for sure. It's just having the best and most well-tailored ecosystems or solutions or protocols emerge by virtue of the market. But coordination is definitely a big part of it as well.
Yeah, I know that you agree with some of the takes that we've been sharing with regards to, I think, like the two big breakthroughs that will like kind of unify Ethereum is some sort of very fast composability between rollups, whether it be through some sort of shared sequencing mechanism, intent-based interoperability, something that's like sub 500 millisecond transactions, 300 millisecond, like almost atomic, to some extent, but maybe not all the way or fully all the way. And then just a wallet UX that feels like that Ethereum OG experience where it's just like you're interacting on one chain, which I know there's a ton of teams working on with the, they call it like chain abstraction kind of stack there. And like those two breakthroughs will be like, that should put us in a place where I'm going to my one wallet that has all of my balances across all of my rollups, app chains included, and I can interact with any application on any chain with the same almost wallet experience as I was just doing on MetaMask, on Ethereum L1, farming sushi in DeFi Summer.
Yeah. And I really like the way that you guys break that down in terms of like, okay, there's the front end issues almost, which are not strictly front end. I mean, there's all kinds of, standards that will have to be aligned on, whether that ends up being through an EIP process or kind of more organically or through competitive markets. But regardless, there's the kind of user facing element of it. And then there's what's running underneath. And of course, I spend much more of my time thinking about what's running underneath. Espresso is building really a coordination system for coordinated block building. This sometimes gets called shared sequencing, of course. That is going to be a necessity. Like, you can't have synchronous composability or that level of atomic transaction without having some notion of coordinated block building or shared sequencing. So I think that that's going to be really important. And of course, I think that this again is a very positive dynamic. There's a few different sort of competing proposals for how to go about this. But all of that is not worth its salt if we don't also have folks working on, as you said, it kind of gets called the chain abstraction piece. I think all of these terms and phrases, to be honest, are very confusing because it's like, well, in a way, Espresso is working on chain abstraction, but no, not the front end part of it, not the wallet interface. That's what these other guys are doing over here. So, I do think that this is a big part of the challenge right now. I think that there will be consolidation, and as more of these projects ship to mainnet, it'll shake out sort of what goes where, what the standards are, what works nicely with other products that are working towards the same goals, what maybe is less compatible. and all of this. So I think that this will resolve itself in the coming months, couple of years. But it is a challenge right now of even just the fragmentation of solutions, right? It's like for all of these different solutions trying to solve the problem of fragmentation.
It's like the event fragmentation at ETHCC and other conferences is also like a funny knock-on effect of like the capital formation in crypto and then the incentive structures of the individual teams. It's kind of a
that itself was fractal, right? Of going around to all of these different fragmented events there in Brussels around what is supposed to be
a bit more consolidated.
Yeah,
we'll see.
Yeah, I hope so too. I mean, this again, credit to Solana for really nailing the counter positioning. You know,
I saw your tweet on that. That was
Breakpoint conference coming up.
Yeah,
and they're just like, screw it, no side
events,
no panels.
Bullshit.
Yeah, like there's going to be 2 tracks here. It's one conference. And that I think is, they're just nailing the brand marketing, right? Like if their goal is to create this brand and product, of course, and user experience that is unified, and that's kind of their big differentiator, then yeah, what they've done with the Breakpoint conference is absolutely nailing the brand marketing there. And I don't think it's necessarily something that like Ethereum needs to take a lesson from. Like I think that Ethereum needs to lean into its differences actually here and just say that like, no, this is part of the fact that Ethereum is a more mature project and just has been through sort of more cycles of development and in some ways is, I guess, further down its roadmap, I would argue. But also needs to lean into the fact that, ironically, the rise of all of these sort of walled gardens or, you know, separate ecosystems within Ethereum is a testament to just how open it is for innovation. It's like open systems give rise to capitalism, give rise to competitive markets and competitive dynamics. Whereas, you know, unified or really kind of centrally managed systems don't. And that's not to align these projects with any one ideology, obviously, but it is kind of ironically a testament to Ethereum's openness that this is the state of it today. And I do have faith that we're going to work through it. And again, I think the main thing is just going to be projects shipping to mainnet and having it emerge, like what's working where and who's really solving these issues.
And so you kind of alluded to the point that I think we wanted to get some clarity on as well. I think a lot of these kind of shared sequencing projects get lumped together, but the designs are like way different, trying to solve different goals and, you know, have impacts. Frankly, in speaking to VCs and in speaking to different teams, also just kind of developing a thesis around it, it does seem like this like atomic composability, shared sequencing-esque sector is going to be very like winner takes most because of this idea of kind of it being its own L1 and like trusting and like getting buy-in from Arbitrum and ZK Stack and getting this alignment and kind of being like this third party that equally distributes MEV. And there's a lot of reasons, or that might just get kind of, you know, blown to bits as well. It's kind of tough to have theses in crypto because every 2 years they just somehow change. But that's kind of like the state of things as we're seeing now. So just like, is Espresso a shared sequencer? What is Espresso and how are you thinking about this? Yeah.
No, Espresso is not a shared sequencer. We did used to talk about it as a shared sequencer. That ended up being very confusing and in some ways also just inaccurate. You know, people talk about a sequencer, think of a sequencer as sort of one single entity who does this function of transaction ordering. And then in the case of rollups today, it's obviously centralized and so can provide a pre-confirmation on those transactions, giving users kind of the fast experience that they're used to. And so when we would talk about Espresso as a shared sequencer, people viewed us as this kind of like monolith that they would have to outsource their sequencing to. And that's a very scary thing for rollups, which I think gets at your question here, Andy, of like, is this going to be, in order to achieve coordinated block building and therefore achieve synchronous composability again, like, are rollups going to have to be okay with outsourcing their sequencing to some other network that is going to take care of it? And they're going to have to all coordinate to get on board with the same network at the same time in order to have that seamless interoperability. What we've realized over the last year is that that's just too hard. Not from like a technical perspective. Honestly, the product was in many ways simpler when that was the approach and the design that we had in mind. But more so from an incentive perspective, from like a business perspective, just making it make sense to rollups, make it make sense. It was too hard of an ask to say, hey, come outsource all of your sequencing. We'll figure out some like revenue share agreement. You guys will get some of the sequencing revenue back. Like, rollups are like, no, like, I'll continue building as I am. And, I have enough self-belief in our team and our ecosystem and, the DAO around it or whatever is going on, to be able to make it successful on its own and forego the aspects that you're bringing to the table, which of course are decentralization and then more importantly, interoperability. In taking all of that feedback on board, we have shifted our design pretty significantly. You guys had my colleague Ellie, who works on the research and development side of the company. She's an engineer and has also done a lot of the sort of design architecture work around our consensus. You guys had her on the show to talk a little bit more about the Espresso marketplace approach. This is very different from thinking of us as just like a shared sequencer network that's the equivalent of another L1 that is having the sequencing outsourced to it. The big breakthroughs from a product perspective, I would say, that we had that informed this marketplace design is that, number one, rollups do not want to have to opt into something in perpetuity when it's as big of a deal to them as their sequencer is. They want to be able to opt in and out of it on more of an ad hoc basis. They want to feel confident that it's not a dependency and that it's crucially not somehow going to take all of their revenue once this thing has substantial network effect and is in the stronger negotiating position. I would say that the other thing that really played into this is that revenue component of it. Just the fact that you need, if you're facilitating cross rollup interoperability, you need a way for rollups to feel confident that they are going to get adequately compensated for the value of the transactions and all of the usage and all of that they're bringing to the table. The marketplace solves both of these. We are in the process of implementing the first version of it, and that'll be testing over the course of the next couple of months. So really excited to see it in action and get our first integrations with it. But the core idea here is that rollups can effectively opt in and out of it on an ad hoc basis, as you can do on any kind of marketplace. You can pull your product off of eBay at any given moment, right? You don't need anyone's permission to do that. You don't have to go through some long process of breaking a contract. Same idea here. It's ad hoc, opt in and out as you want to. And then the other beauty of the marketplace is, again, it's an open, fair, free market where rollups will get compensated by the marketplace of sequencers or builders, whatever you want to call them, who are doing this block building. So it's just a very different approach to how to bring shared sequencing to market, how to bring synchronous composability to market for rollups. But it's a challenge for sure, because again, to this point of, are we all building the same thing? Like, okay, we're all building towards the same goals, but I would actually argue that pretty much every project in this space is building something totally different, or, having a very different approach or different implementation details or what have you than each other. I think very few are building literally the same thing. And that's a challenge that we have for sure. Like, wait, but you guys are a shared sequencer. And not only was that never totally accurate, but the product has also evolved quite a bit.
Got it. That was a comprehensive answer. Appreciate that. And
Sorry, long-winded, but
understanding the
Yeah.
technical design also helps. So we'll drop that link in the description if you guys
That
want
would
to
be
check
great.
that one out.
Yeah.
It definitely helps. So just kind of like sum it all up here. Like what we're trying to achieve is to make Ethereum at the rollup level feel like Ethereum in one core, in almost like an integrated or like a
Make Ethereum
unified,
Ethereum again.
yeah, like make it Ethereum again as it was, before gas fees spiked. And I feel like Vitalik's saying that we're close, and I talking to like a ton of chain abstraction teams, hosting workshops, talking to interoperability teams. We already have a cross on just as a basic intent based system that is very fast as long as the solvers
Totally.
aren't having a smoke break, super quick. So like that's like their Espresso, other designs that are focused on like that kind of like atomic aspect will bring us even closer. And then I think these chain abstraction teams in the wallet level, at least, let alone like eventually like the blockchain level, like ag layer, et cetera, are like getting closer and closer too. So it really does feel like we're getting there. And like about
The
to put this
last
all
mile
together.
is always the longest, though.
Yeah.
The last mile always feels the longest, and I think that that's where we are right now. So I guess that's kind of my feeling about Vitalik's tweet is like, oh, damn. Like, I know he's right. We're close. But also, as someone who's been working on this stuff for years, I'm like, God, it's still so far away. But
I know.
it is.
But we didn't really prep you for this one, and I think it can be one of our last. But like, let's
Sure.
say we exist in this world where Espresso is atomically composing L2s. We've got intent bridges. We've got ZK proofs, doing ZK magic and chain abstractions happening. And I've got my one wallet that I've used, and I'm all, tons of different apps. What is the next stage of Ethereum development that is going to be problematic, ripe for competitive upbringing or uproar, and like how can we prepare for that as a community?
That's a great one. I think it's going to be about, and I don't know if you'd really count this as like core infrastructure because it's a bit more peripheral than that. But I think it's going to be about on and off ramping. I think the problem is going to remain around silos. I think that where the silos are that we're focusing on are just going to shift. And so I think it's going to be about specifically what I'm talking about is on and off ramping to and from fiat. I think that, hopefully once we get to a point where this is solved and Ethereum has had its broadband moment, we've made Ethereum composable again, all of that, we're going to see sufficient applications emerge that people really want to onboard and use. That onboarding process still remains a challenge from a UX perspective. And so I think that we're going to start to see new companies, new products, new projects emerge to make that easier. That to me is always kind of the hallmark of like the true bull cycle coming, is that people are worried about onboarding again. But, it's not limited to Ethereum and TradFi. I think bridging between different blockchains remains a challenge. That's something that I'm excited to start at some point expanding sort of what Espresso is working on to work on creating this sort of shared sequencing effect across different L1s. So yeah, I think it's the problem is always going to be about silos. I think that if you look at finance from sort of the beginning of time, from when we were using whatever, shells and beads to exchange, I think it's always been about different silos being able to work seamlessly across each other. I think that's, to me, again, why I feel so passionately that Ethereum should remain an infinite garden, that we can't have this walled garden experience for users. And I think that we'll just move the goalposts from making Ethereum composable again within itself to making Ethereum really seamless with other ecosystems, including the traditional legacy financial ecosystem.
Cartesi is your home for app-specific rollups. At the forefront of developing new tools and platforms that enhance the capabilities of blockchain technology, Cartesi enables applications that are flexible and built to scale. Build on a full Linux environment and use traditional software libraries, but in blockchain development. Go to cartesi.io, that's cartesi.io, to learn more about building your own app chain today.
That was a really good answer. And I think just to add on to that, the social coordination and community divides between rollups with like, oh, we have native yield, come deposit here for 60 days. We have this app. We have like, once we get to this world where the composability is so much greater as well as the abstraction of the chains, I think like the entire shift towards like the applications will like really kind of happen, in the sense that the same application sets on different chains will no longer necessarily be that valuable, because you can access Uniswap across every chain or access an aggregator across every chain.
Totally.
In the DeFi sense. And then also from a community perspective, I think right now L2s are being built from like, who can get the biggest TVL, the best apps, best builders, grow the most sequence revenue. I think that'll completely shift back to, oh, we're actually trying to scale Ethereum again. We're not just trying to build like the best L2 or silo. We're actually just trying to scale the base layer to build the best ecosystem as a whole. Because once you kind of break down the UX barriers and the bridging barriers between the gardens, if you will, then the entire vision shifts from like, if user A enters into some app on this chain, they can easily go to a different app that's on a completely different chain with very little barrier. But that's benefiting all the other rollups in the space, because this one app did really good out of, top of funnel marketing, et cetera, and brought them all in to the Ethereum space, not just to their rollup. And, that's kind of like the vision that I'm seeing. And that was one of the most exciting things I thought about shared sequencing as a whole as well.
I think a lot, I mean, as you know, I think a lot about walled gardens, and I think a lot about my experience of other internet walled gardens, whether it's the Apple App Store and sort of the monopolistic effects of that. Or honestly, my early internet experiences using AOL. Like AOL was the OG walled garden, and it was this thing where you'd log into AOL and say, welcome, you've got mail, right? And, you'd have just this one screen open, and it would be AOL News, AOL Services. Like they had an exclusive deal with 1-800-Florists that like, if you tried to buy flowers on the internet and you were using AOL, it would use 1-800-Florists. It had its own messaging application. You couldn't use any other messaging application within it. Like that, to me, that is so representative in like a very literal way of what the various walled gardens within blockchains feel like today. And I'm really excited to move back towards a kind of open internet paradigm that you're describing. And I do think that it changes everything also just in weird, unpredictable ways. Like I wouldn't have been able to imagine when I was sitting at my computer in 2002 logging into AOL what the internet would look and feel like today in this more open paradigm.
Awesome. A lot of boomer takes today, Jill.
Yeah, you guys don't even remember AOL. Damn. I'm old.
No, okay. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you guys so much for giving me a boomer platform. And excited to go keep building the future. And really grateful, honestly, to you guys for what you do in bringing all the different folks across this crazy Ethereum and modular ecosystem together to actually be able to coordinate and get straight what we're all working on with different pieces of it. It's awesome. So great to be here.
Appreciate that. Thanks for coming on. Just doing our part in the education UX.
For sure. Cool.